6:30, whatever time it is where you're at. It's a 30 right now, so we'll go ahead and get started. Oh, and Amy, I see you're already recording. Welcome, everybody. As Francis just mentioned, we are doing our survey tonight, where you could possibly win a gift card to Barnes and Noble. So, Francis, if you could just put that in there one last time.
Sure.
And then we'll...
Whoops. I actually sent it to Amy privately. Sorry about that.
I've done that before, too.
Just to Amy. Sorry.
Amy's the only one that can win.
There
Gonna put that in there right now. Perfect. So that'll have some little questions on there. So answer that, and then we'll announce the winner at the end of the night tonight. I also want to let you know before we get started here, this is going to be our hashtag we're going to be using tonight. We are going to be live tweeting this using the hashtag overcoming imposter syndrome. Now, I just want to go ahead and jump right into this because I'm so excited for tonight. We have Cynthia Bassett that's going to be talking about imposter syndrome with us tonight. And it's very timely because I feel like this was just discussed a little bit on the Big Bang Theory the other week. Something about it just got brought up in there. You have imposter syndrome. So I think it's really timely that we're discussing this week. So, Cindy, if you want to take it away, thank you.
Can everybody hear me okay? I'm gonna try. I can't really pay attention to the chat and everything else. So if I need to see something from the chat, then just alert me. I'm hoping that this is going to be a pretty informal kind of conversation, and I'd really like it if it were really like a conversation as opposed to me like yakking at y'all. Because I think that there's a lot of good opportunity here for us to have conversations, and this topic in particular to me is really very much in line, not so much with what our abilities are as people, but in how we perceive ourselves and how we're feeling about our work. So I titled this talk, Imposter Syndrome, the Plague or Good Fortune of the Smart Professional. And the biggest takeaway that I think that I want any and all of you to have is that if you are feeling any of these things that I'm going to describe in this talk, you're not alone. Most people feel this or experience this, particularly at times when they are in periods of growth and trying to achieve new things and become the bigger versions of themselves that they're trying to become, which when you're in school is just like the very definition of that. So if you're feeling this, then you're not alone. So that's kind of the big takeaway. I'm going to talk just a little bit about myself, and it's not so much just to hear myself talk, but I think it might serve as sort of an example of how ubiquitous this type of experience is. I am the Electronic Services Librarian at the University of Missouri School of Law. I mentioned that I graduated library school in 1999. I started in 99, I graduated in 2001. From there, I went to the public library system in St. Louis County and stayed there for a couple of years and then went to the Secretary of State's office in Missouri. They have a state library that serves state employees, and I helped do collection development for that library, for the state library, and really kind of created a training program to teach state employees how to use databases, because many of them did not know or didn't even know that they had access to information resources that the library provided for them. So that's what I did there until the job that I'm in now came open. Now, I had taken a class in library school, actually taught by my current director. It was on law library administration. There were probably, 4 of us in that class. It was a very small class. And I had thought before going to library school that I wanted to do either law school or library school, and maybe both. And I decided to go to library school first because I knew that the research skills that I would gain as a librarian would serve me in good stead if I decided to go to law school. And I went through the library science program, and I really didn't, I mean, besides taking the law library administration class, I just was so in love with libraries that I didn't want to do anything else. I just loved it. And I didn't feel like I needed to do anything else. I just went and lived my happy life being a librarian. And it seemed a little fortuitous, actually, or a little different, that I came back around and I interviewed and came to work at the law library where I had taken that law library administration class. I do not have a JD, and about half of law librarians have JDs and half don't. Most law librarians who do any work teaching students or it's really in academia, that it's not absolutely required, but it's pretty, most law librarians that are teaching students actually do have a JD. And ironically enough, most law librarians in firms don't. So I find that very interesting. I would think it would be just the opposite, but it's not. So most of my colleagues have a law degree. I and one other colleague don't. We're both highly talented in our own ways, but it feels like when you're surrounded by people who are trying to get a certain kind of degree and you don't have that and you're teaching them, that's sort of a breeding ground in my mind, or in my experience, for imposter syndrome. So at the moment, and I'm going to talk about this a little bit later in the talk, I'm a JD student. I started, this is going to sound crazy, I started almost 3 years ago. It's actually probably been more like 4 when I started studying. When I made the decision that I wanted to get a law degree, and I started studying for the LSAT about this time 4 years ago, and I've just been working at it ever since. So I'll be halfway done with that program in July. I'm going to do a summer class this summer where I'm going to be working in a legal clinic and helping veterans. I just had this book sitting here. I was like, oh, look, this is my printed out case book for my workers' compensation class. Those are all cases that I've read. I was like, man, if my teacher had handed that to me before the semester started, I would have been like, no way can I do that. But I just bit it off chunk by chunk, and here we are. So chunk by chunk, I've been doing this law degree for 3 years. I'm halfway through, and I've got a couple more years to go. So you're here actually to learn more about imposter syndrome. I discovered imposter syndrome probably, 4 or 5 years ago. And it came up in, I think, some academic work that I was reading, and I was kind of shaken because when I read the descriptions about what imposter syndrome was, I realized that the people that were writing about it were describing things that I was having trouble even acknowledging to myself. So that was kind of eye-opening, like, oh, this is a thing. And it's actually kind of even more of a thing in academia, in schools, than probably anywhere else, because that's where people are really, kind of pushing themselves out of their comfort zone. So imposter syndrome, I thought that you might appreciate this short cartoon. And I think that this just sums up perfectly how most of us feel on the inside. Be like, oh, high profile authority positions, and of course, oh, except for actual phonies like you. And there's the guy on the couch, and he's like, oh no, they've discovered it. So imposter syndrome was actually originally called imposter phenomenon. It is a term coined by 2 psychologists, Pauline Clance and Suzanne Imes, and this was in the late 70s. They said that imposter syndrome was a feeling of phoniness in people who believe they're not intelligent, capable, or creative, despite evidence of high achievement, which I think is probably the crux of it. And they said that while these people are highly motivated to achieve, they also live in fear of being found out or exposed as frauds. And the work that Clance and Imes did is continuing to be explored, and psychologists are still working with these ideas today. So they've stood up the test of time. I found a 2017 article from the Frontiers of Psychology that defined imposter syndrome. They said it refers to high achievers who underestimate their abilities and thus fear being unmasked as imposters. So I do want to clarify that imposter syndrome is not something that shows up in like the DSM. It's not a like psychiatric disorder. It's simply a description for something that many people have felt and experienced. And I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a clinician. I'm just somebody who basically heard about this. It rang a bell, and I actually put off doing anything with it for a very long time. The only thing that really kind of prompted me to put together a program on this was that I was at I have a law librarians conference that I go to almost every year. And at that conference, in 2 different conversations, I was meeting with a mentor of mine who's actually getting like a Lifetime Achievement Award this year. He's pretty fantastic. And then a mentee of mine that had been assigned to me and that I'd grown pretty close to. And in those 2 different conversations with those 2 different people in very different stages of their professional lives, they both commented on experiencing imposter syndrome. And so to have these kind of synchronistic conversations, and maybe I'm the common denominator there. Maybe I was feeling it and they were just like, yeah, I felt that too. But it doesn't matter, because we all at least admitted that we had felt it and experienced it at different points in time. So it let me know that I'm not alone, and that there are a number of people who, feel this, and that there are some things that we can do to help one another get through it. This is called the imposter cycle. This was done by the psychologist, one of the psychologists who did the original study or coined the phrase. And I think it's really pretty interesting to kind of work through this chart. And really, it starts here up at the upper left-hand corner with the achievement-related tasks. And from there, you move over, after you're assigned the achievement-related task, that's when the emotional experience happens of experiencing anxiety, self-doubt, and worry. And from there, they said that most people who experience imposter syndrome react to those feelings, that internal experience, in one of 2 ways. One is that they either over-prepare super zealously, like so much work to make sure that they're not found out as being not up to the task. Or on the other end of the spectrum, they procrastinate because they're scared of the feelings. And so then they try to deny that it's happening, and they wait until the very last minute. Both of those people, whichever way that the person responds to the feelings, they almost always come through and have a positive experience. So they accomplish whatever the achievement-related task is. And you can see that right after the over-preparation and procrastination is the accomplishment comes either through effort or, whatever innate talent. Actually, it's not even about innate talent. It's just they have the skills that they need to do it, and they accomplish it. So then they get a feeling of relief, and they get positive feedback from other people. So then they get this kind of feedback loop, but there's a tendency there to kind of undercut that positive feedback, to say, oh, this doesn't really count because I either so over prepared, it was just like I just worked my butt off the whole time. It's not that I really have these skills, I just worked really hard. Or it's that they know that they procrastinated and they just got lucky. Like, I skated by on the skin of my teeth this time, but next time they're going to find out. And so that leads us to the perceived fraudulence and increased self-doubt, depression, and anxiety. And so this cycle can continue every time you either have an achievement-related task or an achievement-related task that kind of pushes you outside your comfort zone. So I don't know if you can see yourself there. I certainly could see myself in that particular experience. And the odd thing is that I see myself on both sides. Like I can see myself doing either the over-preparedness or the procrastination or both. I don't know. It's crazy. This is kind of a dangerous thing to bring up to a group that's talking about imposter syndrome, but there is this other type of cognitive bias that I think is related, and it's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. Dunning-Kruger being two different scientists who were studying this particular cognitive bias. And the Dunning-Kruger effect is basically when people fail to recognize their own incompetence. So they feel more confident than they are actually competent. And the reason I say this is dangerous to bring up when you're talking to people who are talking about imposter syndrome is that most of us are like, oh no, it's me. I've got Dunning-Kruger. I just really think I'm not competent, you know. But I think if you think that you have Dunning-Kruger, then maybe you don't have Dunning-Kruger. I don't know. It's kind of a crazy loop that I don't even know if I want to go down there. But this is, I think probably the takeaway is that most people are somewhere on a spectrum of between all of this, and that we can all fall prey to cognitive biases at different points in time. Are there any questions before I keep going? Because I don't want to keep yakking.
When you talk about the effect, the imposter syndrome, what typical professions are the most susceptible?
You know, sorry, I'm hearing feedback here. I don't want to. Okay. That's a really interesting question. And from what I've read, I don't know that there's any particular profession. A lot of what I've read has to do with academia, but I also read quite a lot about business and CEOs who experience this. I did some reading as well to see if there was a link between gender and imposter syndrome, because I wondered if this was something that was, and I'll talk about this a little bit further on, but I wondered if there was a link between gender. Really the conclusion that I've come to, and I don't have like a source that I can just say, you know, these guys agreed with me, but it seemed like this particular experience is one that is pretty universal. So I don't know that, I just don't think that there's any one particular profession that really is just riddled with it or got nailed by it. I wish I had a better answer for you, because I'd really like to say, you know, it's the doctors, you know, those crazy doctors, but I don't think that it is any one profession. I think it shows up when people are in situations where they're being challenged, and that could be really any type of profession. My husband actually doesn't do anything academic. He's older than I am, and he fixes things for a living, and he says that sometimes he'll show up to fix something, and he's been fixing things for a long time, and he shows up and he's like, I know I'm not going to be able to do it this time, and they're going to figure out that I don't know anything about fixing stuff, and then he shows up and he fixes it. It's like, it just, I don't think that there's a lock on any one profession.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so just thinking about, not that we want to diagnose ourselves, but sometimes it helps to have something that you can relate to. So, do you chalk up your success to luck, timing or computer error. So you can just see if you can see yourself in any of these. Do you believe, well, if I could do it, anybody could do it. Like you could figure that, if you could figure it out, anybody could figure that out. Do you agonize over small flaws in your work? Are you crushed by constructive criticism, seeing it as evidence of your ineptness? When you do succeed, do you secretly feel like you have fooled them again? And do you worry that it's a matter of time before you're found out? This was just kind of a quick quiz that I found in reading a book by Valerie Young. It was called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women, Why Capable People Suffer from Imposter Syndrome and How to Thrive in Spite of It. And it's interesting because I had recently an experience this past year in my law degree where I competed against other law students to join a team, and I was selected to join this team. And then I was competing as part of the team. And one of the things that I did was I ended up having to, not having to, but I put together a brief, which for lawyers is never brief. And my dean was part of the group that was like helping us prepare. And she pointed out a flaw that I had made in this particular brief. And it was agonizing. So to me, it was a pretty small flaw. But it's one of those things that's like, I've just struggled with it ever since, because it's even, do you agonize over small flaws in your work? Like, yes, sometimes I do agonize over it. Was I crushed by her constructive criticism, seeing it as evidence of my ineptness? Yes, I definitely experienced that. So even, I don't relate this anecdote because I want you to be like, oh, great, why should we why should we listen to anything that Cindy has to say about this? Because obviously I'm still dealing with this. But I think that probably the takeaway for me is that this is not something that's ever going to be like completely gone. It's something that I am learning and putting tools into place to help me when I do have this experience. So. Valerie Young also identified what she called the 5 different types of imposter syndrome. And I included these in my presentation just to be able to give you another window to see yourself. So you might see yourself or you might not. It's completely up to you. The other viewpoint that you can use for looking at these, even if you don't see yourself in these particular descriptions, it's possible or even likely that you will at some point manage someone who deals with this type of experience. So you might just keep your eyes open with that kind of perspective in mind, like how can I help someone else, a friend, a colleague, someone that you supervise, how can I help them with this experience? So the first one was the perfectionist. Perfectionists set excessively high goals for themselves. The emphasis there being excessively, like it's fine to set a high goal for yourself, but if you set a goal for the moon and then you don't reach it, then you worry like, oh, did I not measure up? When really it wasn't so much that you didn't measure up, it's that you've created this huge expectation for yourself and then not been able to meet a huge expectation. So some questions you might ask yourself to see if this is fits for you are, have you ever been accused of being a micromanager? Do you have difficulty delegating? Or when you do delegate, do you feel frustrated and disappointed with the results of the delegation? Do you miss when you miss the insanely high mark on something, do you accuse yourself of not being cut out for your job and you ruminate on it for days? This is a perfect description of my experience with the brief that I wrote. It's like, Have I ruminated about this for days? Yes. So, yeah. Do you feel like your work must be 100% perfect 100% of the time? Okay. The next one is the super person, Superman, Superwoman. The supers may feel as if they're frauds among colleagues who are true blue. They can push themselves to measure up, causing harm to their own health. So some questions you might ask yourself about this are, do you stay later at the office than the rest of your team, even past the point when you've completed the work that you need to do for that day? Do you get stressed when you're not working and find downtime completely wasteful? Have you let your hobbies and passions fall by the wayside, sacrificed to work? Or in your case, to school? Or to school and work? Because I suspect that many of you also work as you're going to school. Do you feel like you haven't truly earned your title despite numerous degrees and achievements, so you feel pressed to work harder and longer than those around you to prove your worth? Now, depending on where you are in your professional life, this may not apply to you yet, or you might be able to see experiences that you would have as a younger person or a student that might apply to that. All right, the natural genius. Like perfectionists, the genius also sets an impossibly high bar, but they expect themselves to have a natural ability for the task and to succeed at it immediately. So if you have a track record of getting like straight A's or gold stars in everything that you do, or were you frequently told that you were the smart kid, then this might have set you up to be or to feel like you should be a natural genius. Like you should just have a natural affinity for something without having to really work to master the skills to do it. Do you dislike the idea of having a mentor because you feel like you can handle things on your own? When you're faced with a setback, does your confidence tumble? Because not performing well provokes a feeling of shame. I think that's actually kind of ubiquitous with all of these different descriptions. Do you avoid challenges because it's so uncomfortable to try something you're not great at? And I think that that's really kind of a good description of how imposter syndrome can harm us, is that sometimes we just don't try new and challenging things because we're afraid of being found out, not being perfect. All right. Number 4, the rugged individualist. Pardon me for a moment here. It's pollen season in Missouri. I think it's pollen season everywhere. Okay, so rugged individualists, they feel as though asking for help will reveal their phoniness. They're determined to keep their cover intact. And some questions to think about if you think that this might be you is, do you feel like you need to accomplish things on your own? If you hear yourself saying things like, I don't need anybody's help, I can do it. Or if you frame requests in terms of the requirement of the project rather than yourself. Like, I think just really the crux of this is that, do you feel like you're supposed to be able to manage all of life's challenges on your own? All right, the expert. Experts may feel like they somehow tricked their employer into hiring them. Thus, they feel deeply scared about being exposed as inexperienced or unknowledgeable. So some questions to ask yourself if this might be you would be, do you shy away from applying to a job unless you can meet every single educational requirement? Do you constantly seek out trainings or certifications because you think you need to improve your skills in order to succeed? To me, this is a really difficult question because I think as librarians, I think that we are, as a group, pretty good about acknowledging our need for professional development. We were talking before this got started about the changes in technology over the last 20, 25, 30 years. If we don't do professional development, then those skills get rusty. And so I don't know, I think as a group, we're pretty invested in professional development. So I'm not really sure what to think about that question in light of our particular profession. I guess it could be that if you were seeking something out over and over again that you'd already mastered, but you just didn't necessarily feel the confidence that you really got the message the first time or the second time. Yeah. And the last question for that one is, even if you've been in your role for some time, can you relate to feeling like you still don't know enough? I want to say no, but also in librarianship, and maybe this is just life in general, I feel like there's always something more to learn. Like there's always something about my job that I feel like I'm still learning. So. Okay, so who struggles with imposter syndrome? Does anybody have any questions about any of that before I go on? I think some of those tend to bleed into one another, but we'll have an opportunity here in a minute to talk about, to talk into breakout rooms. So that might be actually a topic of conversation, is just kind of exploring which of those you think that you might identify with, if you identify with any of them.
No, everything's okay.
Okay. All right. I'll keep.
Cindy,
Oh, go ahead. Yeah.
this is Amy. I'm in a kind of a feeling that I'm graduating in May. I've done really well in school, but am I going to be able to apply what I learn? And that fear is really scary, and as I'm job hunting. So I am shying away from jobs where I don't think I can do the work. And so that puts me in the expert category, I think.
Mm-hmm. So are you trying to discern which jobs to apply to? Like, how far out of your comfort zone do you really feel like you can get without getting so far out that you have misrepresented yourself to your employer? Is that kind of the
right? Yeah, that's a concern I have.
Yeah. You know, that's a really, I appreciate you bringing this up, because nobody wants to be that guy who like overpromises and underdelivers in a job. Like, say, you know, you can bring all these great skills and then you get here and you're like, oh no, not me. I really can't. I really don't know how to do that. But I think that you should be as honest as possible with your future employers. And that includes being honest about your accomplishments and the skills that you do have. And then let them decide if you have the right skills needed for that job, because they're going to know better than you, what the job entails and what resources are at hand for whatever it is that they need you to do. So for example, the job that I have now, the electronic services job, the library was just starting a digitization program, and I had not done digitization at all. And so really they were hoping to fill that position with somebody who was either had not necessarily had the experience, but was at least willing to learn. And so for that job interview, which an academic law librarian job interview is like a day-long process, it's crazy. But for that job interview, I did a lot of research on what the process would look like, and what I would need to learn to be able to do that. And so that's what I presented to them. I didn't come to them and say, oh, I know how to do this, and I'm your person, and I know all these metadata standards, and like, yeah, no. But what I did do is say, all right, well, this is the background that I've researched. This is one approach for doing a project, approaching this project. These are the things that I would need to learn, and this is what I would try to accomplish. And I think that was a way for them to know that I understood the process without over-representing my skills. Does that make sense? I don't know if that helps.
Yes,
Amy.
thank you. And that's very helpful too. I hadn't considered it along those lines.
Part of this presentation is going to focus at the end on some different tools that you can use. And one of those I think might be particularly useful for you, which is mentorship. And talking to someone about what it is that you're doing can sometimes help give a different perspective. And so that might be something to consider, is if you have somebody that you could talk to as a mentor, like, hey, I'm thinking about applying for this job. These are the skills that they say that they want. And this is what I think that I can do. Does this seem like a mismatch to you? Just to kind of check in. And that way you're not trying to just figure it all out in your head. Because sometimes we can just go in a squirrel cage in our heads and never really get anywhere productive. And then you could end up talking yourself out of even applying for something that you might be perfectly capable of accomplishing if you gave yourself the chance, or if they gave you the chance. And you don't want to do that. And in fact, there's pretty solid research out there that shows that on a gender gap, for the most part, I was looking at imposter syndrome in terms of like who experiences it, but there's also some pretty solid research that shows that males typically don't have a problem, saying, hey, I think I can do this, and applying for things that are outside of their skill set. Whereas women feel like, this is a generalization, I hope you know this, but women a lot of times will feel like, oh, I don't have every single qualification that they ask for, so I can't apply. I'm not going to be good. So I encourage all of you to think about not necessarily that you have every single qualification, but could you gain them? Could you be honest with them and say, well, I don't have this, but I have this. Like, for example, for myself, for me to make a lateral move anywhere at any academic library, even in the positions that I'm at, most of them require a JD. I don't have it, but I have half a JD, and I have this many years of experience of teaching legal research and writing and doing electronic resource management. So even if I didn't have all those perfect qualifications, I could still put myself out there on that job market and possibly be able to get a job with what I have now. Does that make sense? That's just my viewpoint on it.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, just so that you know that you're not alone. Are there any other questions before I keep on going?
No, we're okay.
Okay, all right. So who has imposter syndrome? This is pretty much true. All those smart, successful people that you think just have their shit together, most people have experienced imposter syndrome. So I mentioned before that I was curious to see if there was a link between gender. The interesting thing about this is that some of the newer research shows that 70% of people will experience at least one episode of imposter phenomenon in their lives. That was from a 2007 study out of the International Journal of Behavioral Science. And then when you're looking at the kind of the gender correlations there, Imes and Clance actually thought that more women suffered from imposter syndrome than men. But actually that's not true. The two psychologists who coined the phrase found that once they, if they just were talking to males, they wouldn't share those feelings, they wouldn't admit to them. But once they started doing anonymous surveying, then the rates of imposter syndrome among the genders was equivalent. So it wasn't so much that the genders experienced it at different rates, it was just the willingness to talk about it or express it was different, which I thought was interesting. And this is just the part of the presentation that I want you to know where even really great people have experienced this. So some of you may recognize Neil Gaiman. If you don't recognize Neil Gaiman, we cannot be friends, and you should just run out and run to your public library and check out everything this man's ever written. So he was talking about an incident that happened. He said he was lucky enough to get invited to what he called a gathering of great and good people, artists and scientists, writers and discoverers of things, which I hear in like Neil's voice from having listened to so many of his audiobooks. And he said that I felt at that moment that they would realize I didn't qualify to be there among these people who had really done things, like really great things. And he said on my second or third night there, I was standing at the back of the hall while the musical entertainment happened, and I started talking to a very nice, polite, elderly gentleman about several things, including our shared first name. And then he pointed to the hall of people and said words to the effect of, I just look at all these people and I think, what the heck am I doing here? They've made amazing things. I just went where I was sent. And I said, yes, but you were the first man on the moon. I think that counts for something. So, of course, he was having a conversation with Neil Armstrong at the time. And he said, and this is Neil Gaiman, he said, and I felt a bit better because if Neil Armstrong felt like an imposter, maybe everyone did. Maybe there weren't any grown-ups, only people who had worked hard and also got lucky and were slightly out of their depth. All of us doing the best job we could, which is all we can really hope for, which I just think that is just a fantastic summary of what I would like to impart to you. So some of you may recognize Neil Gaiman's wife, Amanda Palmer. She talks about this. She's got a book called The Art of the Ask, and she was talking about her experience of what she calls the fraud police, which she sums up as, we've been watching you. We have evidence. You have no idea what you're doing. You're accused of the crime of completely winging it. You're guilty of making shit up as you go along. You do not actually deserve your job. We're taking everything away and we're telling everybody, which I think is a great description of that kind of internal dialogue that can happen to us. Maya Angelou commented that she had written 11 books, but each time she thinks, uh-oh, they're going to find out now. I've run a game on everybody and they're going to find me out. Don Cheadle, all I can see is everything I'm doing wrong. That is a sham and a fraud. So the list of people who have commented on this is it just goes on. And I think this is just some of the creative people that I noticed, some of the business professionals, Dr. Margaret Chan, who is the director of the World Health Organization, Michelle Obama, Sheryl Sandberg, Justice Sotomayor. Like, man, that's a pretty stellar list right there. So if those people discuss having had this kind of experience, then I'm in good company. So at this point, if we can, I feel like this is a good point to do our breakout rooms. I'm not 100% how this is actually going to work. But my idea behind it is that sometimes it's easier for people to talk in small groups than it is to talk in big groups. And it looks like there's 27 of us right now, so that's quite a few.
Cindy, I have set up 7 breakout rooms. So we could, if all of us move into a breakout room, we would have 4 in most of them and 3 in another. I don't know if Casey, who's doing the recording, wants to move. I don't know if Jessica wants to move, some of us who are on the board. So it just depends. I guess I'd need a poll to see if I want to automatically assign everybody to a room or if I need to choose name by name. So I'd be interested in seeing hands or something of those who would like to not stay in a breakout room at this point. In the, okay, so Esther.
And maybe people just want to throw it into the chat room. Like if you hate the idea of going to a breakout room, we don't have to do that.
That's true. They're there if you want them. Okay. Oh, went away.
Amy,
Well,
I'd say go ahead and just separate people out into the breakout rooms, and then
you can actually move yourself out of a breakout room once you've been put in.
Yeah.
Okay. So it'll be faster if I just set it up so that everybody, you automatically will move into a room and you can move yourself out immediately.
Actually, I don't even think you have to go into it if you don't want to, if you choose not to. So
well, so what I was saying is I can have people move automatically, which means the system moves you, or I can do it manually.
Okay.
And I'd rather do it automatically with this many people. So all right, so Casey, have you paused the recording?